Take 5. Hello, welcome back to TSC Talks, the podcast where we talk about tuberous sclerosis complex and other related issues such as intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism. My name's Jill Woodworth and I'm your host. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you got to catch some of or all of the 3-part series with Dina Hook, VP of Support Services at the TS Alliance, and the phenomenal amount of work that she's done for that organization, how many lives she's touched over the course of her career, her early inspiration, career inspiration, or actually not early, but across her whole career with her son who had severe dyslexia. Moving forward, my guest today is Caroline Clyborne. Caroline was a past guest on TSC Talks back at the end of January. She came on to talk about TSC and trauma. And when I had her on, I think that was one of the podcasts where I was incredibly fascinated by what she was talking about, but at the same time, horrifically triggered. So it was just a mind-bending podcast and kind of changed the way I understood the entire history, my own personal history, but entire history of managing TSC care in my children and the impact of trauma and, you know, what that is and how I could move forward knowing this, because it was really helpful putting the pieces together. So anyways, really thrilled to have Caroline on the podcast to pregame her upcoming webinar, which you should all try to tune in for if you can. TAND webinar, Trauma 101 for parents of medically complex kids. Caroline is going to talk to you about getting a better understanding of what trauma is, learn some coping skills for navigating, how to be self-regulated and resilient, regardless of what's going on with your child medically. She's really excited to talk to you because a lot of parents are not aware, and a lot of medical professionals as well, that when a parent is able to be resilient and all the things that they have to do, it really does have an impact on the child's mental health. So it's a hand-in-hand deal. There's a lot more here, and I'm going to stop talking. Wanted to give another shout out to my audio editor and business partner, Lisa Larson. Thanks so much. And Jan Kebby for the artwork that I'm still using and waiting to hear back from him on that. Stay tuned for more coming up next week with Jay Isham. And also remember the webinar. Thanks again, guys, and take it away, Caroline. Thanks, Caroline, for being on the podcast again. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and I know you have a webinar coming up on June 25th.
That's correct.
Sponsored by the TS Alliance, TAN webinar, and TAN is tuberous sclerosis-associated neuropsychiatric disorder, which is a component of a TSC diagnosis and encompasses almost the entire mental health umbrella. She is a TSC mom, and she's a licensed professional counselor. She was on the podcast. Wow, it's been a few months at least. And we talked about polyvagal theory and trauma. And so we thought we'd just talk a little bit about what's happened since then and just give some ideas about what's going to be presented in the podcast and why people should tune in. So thanks for being on, Caroline.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So just real quickly, just give me a little bit of your background and your work that you've done. Yeah.
I'm a licensed professional counselor. I live in Austin, Texas, and I specifically work with parents and caregivers of medically complex children and help them be resilient in navigating the medical system and managing their own medical trauma and response to the things that are happening with their child. And parents have to both stay present with their children and help their children manage the scares that they might have or the struggles that they might have. And they also have to handle so many logistics and they
Mm-hmm.
have to overcome their own feelings about medical stuff coming up in their lives. And sometimes that can be really overwhelming. And
Mm-hmm.
so it is important to have people who can help parents be resilient coming in and out of the medical system with their kids and just manage a sense of overwhelm so that they can be the present parents that they want to be. And that's the majority of my practice, as well as working with medical trauma in chronically ill patients.
Wow. Yeah. And as you're talking about it, I'm remembering when you were on the podcast, and it was kind of a pivotal moment for me personally, reflecting on the history I had with my children with tuberous sclerosis, kind of put into perspective why it was so incredibly hard and why I sought to escape, and not really even intentionally. It was just when you explain how polyvagal theory works and how we're always, trauma, I think, was the link. So your explanations of trauma were just so helpful for me, and able to look back and understand and just offer, self-compassion and just a lot of healing and compassion for what went on. And I guess part of this podcast is talking about this so other parents that are going through this at the very beginning and they're overwhelmed with all the crises that arise, they feel validated and they know that it's there's a lot of these feelings are perfectly normal, and they're expected. You'd be superhuman if you didn't have them. So
exactly. I mean, the TAND webinar that's coming up is really going to be focused on helping parents kind of get a starter understanding of what trauma is and how to, and just to give them some starting coping skills for navigating how to be as self-regulated and resilient as possible, regardless of what's going on with your child medically. I think the purpose and the reason why I'm so excited to talk to you today is because a lot of parents are not aware, and a lot of medical professionals too are not aware, that whether or not a parent is able to be resilient in all of the things that they have to do really has an impact on the child's mental health and on just the overall feeling in the family. And it's important because parents are humans. And I think a lot of times parents are kind of get into this martyr role of, if I just sacrifice myself enough, if I just push harder.
Right. We feel like we don't have any choices sometimes.
Right. And so the parent is constantly in this state of, the one corner I can cut is me. Sometimes it is hard to convince a parent that even talking about self-care sounds like a luxury. It doesn't necessarily sound.
It used to piss me off. Like, you need to practice some self-care. It's like, yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. People think, oh, well, do you think it's going to make any difference whatsoever if I go sit in the tub and 20-minute bubble bath? Like, what are you talking about? Right?
Exactly.
I can understand why parents would really be resistant to the idea of working specifically on their own self-regulation. But I think it's important for us in this window of time to talk about why that is critical, and how that impacts, specifically how that impacts the child in terms of attachment. Right.
So I have here a question. It seems like the focus should be on the child. So why is it important to talk about medical trauma in parents of kids who have TSC? And you kind of just described that. So do you want to add to that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So when a child is born, just like the child is learning language, like right now, if you were to look around your room where you are, I'm assuming that you would see a chair or a couch or pictures on the wall. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a tree. I've got a clock, right? And the reason why I know that that's a chair and that's a couch and that's a tree and that's a clock is because of my history, right? My history taught me that those are objects. I know how to use those objects. I also know whether or not I can expect to be safe in this room. And based on your tone of voice, I know whether or not to expect that we have a good relationship, you're an okay person to talk to, or I can read in your voice that maybe this is not a good situation for me, right? There's a lot of information that I can take in from this exact moment in time, and that has nothing to do with this exact moment in time. It comes from my history, right?
Yes.
History taught me that that was a chair and that was a couch and that your voice is safe and that nothing bad is going to happen in my office. And I know how the light switches work and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Right. You know what to count on.
Exactly. So one of the things our children learn from us, in addition to learning about objects, is that they learn about relationships, right? They learn how the parent self-regulates. So babies, they talk about kangaroo care with newborns where the infant regulates body temperature and heart rate based on what's going on with the parent, right? Parents, you will absolutely notice that if you get upset with a newborn neurotypical baby, that they will get upset too, right?
Yep.
They're attuning to you, right? They're attuning. And the parent's job when the baby is super little is to attune. The baby has a wet diaper. The baby cries. The parent feels distress in their body, and they therefore go and soothe the child, figure out, is the baby hungry? Is the baby tired? Does the baby have a wet diaper? Oh, thank goodness, it's a wet diaper.
Right.
Fix the diaper. Baby stops crying. Everybody's good, right?
Right.
So now you've got this different situation where the child has a medical diagnosis and the parent, everybody talks about the whole welcome to Holland thing. Okay. Well, we get on the plane, we're headed to Europe, and no one, even though 10 to 15% of babies end up, parents end up in Holland, nobody talks about Holland when you're getting on the plane. You know?
Yes.
We say, I don't care if the baby is a girl or a boy, so long as the baby's healthy, So we know that 10 to 15% are not going to end up where everybody is planning on going, but we're not preparing any of these people to end up where they're going to go. So
everybody's got this expectation of
a healthy baby.
A healthy baby. Healthy baby.
Okay. But they show up and they don't have a healthy baby. The baby's done absolutely nothing wrong by being born, right?
Right.
The baby just showed up, and the parent has a reaction to that that's reasonable because we've set up that situation for them, right?
Yes.
So the parent is having to manage a certain level of distress and anxiety in learning about what this diagnosis, what this is going to mean. So the parent is already not bringing their full capacity to manage distress that they would otherwise, okay? And then the child is, in our case, having seizures. Okay. So the child, in addition to having a wet diaper and a hungry tummy and being tired, the child is having periods of time where they're going into seizures. Okay. And sometimes we don't fully understand how infants are responding to infantile spasms in terms of what's in their mind, how they think about it. But I absolutely have seen babies dissociate who have had patterns and histories of uncontrolled seizures.
Really?
And we also know that if a child starts having seizures, that parent is going to have a reaction to that because it is frightening.
It hits at every level of being able to protect your child, I think.
Right. So if what the child is learning from the parent is how to self-regulate, they're regulating body temperature, they're regulating heart rate, they're regulating distress. They're seeing whether or not the parent is capable of soothing them. And then they see the parent is reasonably distressed. Okay? And I want to be very clear that there would be a bigger problem or concern if the parent did not care whether or not their child had seizures. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a good thing that parents have a reaction to that and are human, because that's part of being able to attune as well. But the parent is having a certain amount of distress.
You're impacted.
They're impacted, right? They are in a distressful situation.
Without a doubt.
And they are trying, and their body is playing the vital role